The shot cracked the silence like a whip. It sent a spray of dust and panic into the Montana air, scattering a jury of crows from their perch. Xavier Blackwood pulled his stallion, Thunder, to a halt at the lip of the ridge, his eyes narrowing. Down below on the winding dirt trail, a wagon was stopped. Two figures stood beside it, their argument sharp enough to hear even from this distance. It was 1876. The land was a raw, open wound, and Xavier knew the kind of trouble that festered in it. He'd seen enough during the war and in the years since, building his ranch from nothing but grit and timber. He watched, his face a mask carved from sun-beaten leather. The man was pulling someone from the wagon. A woman. Her hands were tied. Xavier's jaw set like stone. He didn't meddle in other folks' business as a rule, but some lines you just don't let a man cross, not in front of you. He nudged Thunder forward. The descent was a treacherous slide of shale and rock, and the sound of it was a clear announcement. He was coming. By the time he reached the trail, the man had gone quiet. He was a boy, really, with a sorry excuse for a beard and a pistol that looked too heavy for his hand. He kept a hard grip on the woman's arm. "Fine day," Xavier said, his voice a low Virginia drawl. His hand stayed loose, an inch from the Colt on his hip. The boy's eyes were wild, cornered. "Ain't looking for company, mister." The woman's face was a mess of tangled honey-brown hair, but Xavier saw the dark bruise blooming on her cheek. Her eyes met his. They were the color of a gathering storm, full of fear, but something else, too. Something hard and unbroken. "Seems your companion might feel different," Xavier said, nodding to her. "She ain't got no say," the boy spat. "She's my sister. I'm taking her where she'll be of use." Xavier swung down from his horse, his movements slow and deliberate. Up close, he could see the faint family resemblance, but she was porcelain where the boy was cheap clay. She couldn't be more than 22. "Most brothers I know don't tie up their sisters," Xavier said, his voice flat. The boy's face flushed a blotchy red. "This ain't your business. I got debts. She's the coin to pay 'em. Already took a deposit down in Silver Creek." The words landed with a sickening thud. Selling her. To a saloon, a brothel, maybe worse. It was a vile trade that thrived in the shadows of the frontier. "What's your name, miss?" Xavier asked her directly. Her brother yanked her arm. "She don't need to—" "Sophia?" she cut in, her voice shaking but clear. "Sophia Mayfield." "Well, Miss Mayfield," Xavier said, "you're not traveling of your own free will." "She's my kin," the brother Josiah insisted. "I got every right." "No man has the right to sell another." Xavier's voice went cold as a winter creek. "The war settled that." Josiah's hand twitched, moving for the pistol at his belt. "You best ride on, stranger." Xavier had faced down men who knew how to use their guns. This trembling boy was nothing. "I'm making it my concern." It happened in a heartbeat. Josiah drew, but he was clumsy, desperate. Xavier was faster, a lifetime faster. His Colt was in his hand, barking once before Josiah's gun had cleared his belt. The shot kicked up dirt at the boy's feet, making him yelp and drop his weapon. "Next one won't miss," Xavier said, his voice deadly calm. "Untie her." Rage and shame warred on Josiah's face, but fear won. He fumbled with the ropes on Sophia's wrists. "You're robbing me. They paid $50 up front." "Should have found honest work," Xavier replied. He pulled a few bills from his pocket. "Here's 20, for the trouble of you disappearing." Josiah snatched the money, his eyes venomous. "She ain't what she seems, mister," he hissed, backing toward the wagon. "She's a curse. You'll see. You'll regret ever laying eyes on her." He scrambled onto the wagon, grabbing the reins. "I suggest you don't come looking for her," Xavier warned. "She's dead to me," Josiah spat. And with a crack of the reins, the wagon lurched away, swallowed by the dust. Xavier didn't holster his weapon until the wagon was gone. He turned to Sophia. She stood rubbing her wrists, her face unreadable. Are you hurt? She studied him, a long, weary appraisal. Not beyond what you see. Why did you help me, Mr. Blackwood? Xavier Blackwood. And I helped because it was the right thing to do. A brittle laugh escaped her. There's a lot of wrong in this world, Mr. Blackwood. Most men just ride on by. I'm not most men, he said. My ranch is a few hours from here. You can stay there. Get your bearings. Her eyes sharpened. And what payment would you expect for this kindness? The question was a shield, forged in a hard life. None, he said firmly. You'll have your own room, your own peace. When you're ready to leave, I'll see you to town. She looked down the empty road her brother had taken, then back at him. Whatever was behind her was worse than the unknown ahead. Your ranch, then, she agreed. He helped her onto Thunder, then mounted behind her. As they rode, he felt the rigid set of her spine, a woman braced for the next blow. Her brother's warning echoed in his mind. You'll regret this. Little did he know he was riding away from a simple crime and straight into a web of secrets so dark they would threaten to burn his entire world to the ground. The woman he had just saved was not a victim. She was bait, and the trap was about to spring. The sun bled out behind the mountains as they crested the final hill. Blackwood Ranch spread out below them, a pocket of order carved into the wild. A sturdy main house, a barn, corrals. It was his life's work, built with his own 2 hands. Sophia was quiet the whole ride, her silence a heavy cloak. 2 ranch hands, Miguel and a younger one named Tom, emerged from the barn. Miguel, his face a road map of his years, had been with Xavier from the start. His eyes registered Sophia, and the friendly greeting died on his lips. "Boss?" he called out, his voice laced with curiosity. "Change of plans," Xavier said, swinging down before helping Sophia. She was unsteady on her feet for a moment, and he put a hand on her elbow. "This is Miss Sophia Mayfield. She'll be staying with us." Miguel nodded, his gaze lingering on her. It wasn't a look of welcome, it was a look of assessment. Tom just stared, gawking like a fool until Miguel nudged him hard in the ribs. "A chance to wash up would be appreciated," Sophia said, her voice quiet but firm. Her eyes darted around, taking in the layout of the ranch, the distance between the house and the barn, the path to the creek. It wasn't the gaze of a weary traveler. It was the gaze of a scout. Just then, the front door of the house opened. Mrs. Cooper, a woman as solid and dependable as the house itself, came out wiping her hands on an apron. She'd been a godsend since Xavier hired her 3 years ago. Her eyes landed on Sophia and immediately softened with concern. "Oh, my dear child, you look half dead." Sophia straightened, pulling a cloak of dignity around her worn dress. "I'm quite all right, thank you." Xavier gave Mrs. Cooper the short version of the story, leaving out Josiah's strange warning. The housekeeper's face cycled through outrage to a fierce, motherly protection. "That brother of yours needs a horsewhipping," she declared, taking Sophia's arm. "Come now, a hot meal and a soft bed. I've got a stew that'll put the life back in you." As they went inside, Xavier called out, "The blue room, Mrs. Cooper." It was the best guest room, a clear signal that Sophia was a guest, not a charity case. He led Thunder to the barn, the rhythm of unsaddling and brushing the horse calming his thoughts. What had he just done? Bringing a stranger here, a woman with shadows in her eyes. It felt right, but it also felt dangerous. Miguel leaned against the stable door, watching him. "Pretty thing," he commented, his voice low. Xavier shot him a look. She needed help. "Help has a way of finding you, Jefe," Miguel said, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Be careful. A woman running from something usually has something running after her." "Her brother won't be a problem." "Brothers are not always the only problem," Miguel replied, his eyes drifting toward the house. "And her hands, boss. Did you notice her hands?" Xavier paused. What about them? They're soft, Miguel said, like a lady's from the city, not the hands of a farm girl being dragged across the territory by a worthless brother. A chill snaked down Xavier's spine. Miguel was right. Her story, the simple, tragic story he'd accepted on the trail, suddenly had a crack in it, a tiny fracture, but it was there. He walked to the house, the smell of stew and fresh bread doing little to settle the unease in his gut. Later, Sophia came downstairs. Mrs. Cooper had found her a clean dress, a simple green cotton, and her hair was washed and pinned up. The change was startling. Without the dust and fear, she was more than pretty. She was beautiful, with high cheekbones and those storm-gray eyes that missed nothing. The bruise on her cheek was a stark, ugly reminder of what she'd fled. Dinner was quiet. Sophia ate with a delicate precision that seemed out of place with her story of hardship. She asked smart questions about the ranch, about the water sources, the number of cattle, the size of the property. Practical questions. Too practical. You built all this yourself? She asked, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Had help, Xavier admitted. Miguel's been with me since the start. And family? The question slipped out, and she immediately looked down. I'm sorry. That was forward. It's fine, Xavier said. My wife, Helen, died our first winter here. Fever. He laid the facts out like stones, hard and worn smooth by time. I'm sorry, she said, and for the first time her sympathy felt entirely genuine. Later that night, long after the house had fallen silent, Xavier came downstairs for a drink. A lamp was burning in his study. Sophia sat in his leather armchair, a book open on her lap. She looked up, startled. I couldn't sleep. Restless thoughts, he said, pouring himself a whiskey. I get them, too. They sat in silence for a moment. Then she looked at him, her gaze direct. Your foreman, Miguel. He doesn't trust me. The observation was so blunt it caught Xavier off guard. He's cautious. He thinks I'm lying, she said, her voice flat. Are you? He asked, just as flatly. Her eyes didn't waver. My brother was selling me. You saved me from that. That part is true. The careful wording did not escape him. That part is true, which meant other parts weren't. Before he could press her, she stood up. I'm tired now. Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Blackwood. She walked out, leaving him alone with his whiskey and the heavy weight of her unspoken secrets. As he went to shut the door of the study, he noticed something on the floor beside the chair where she'd been sitting, a small object that must have fallen from her pocket. He bent down and picked it up. It was a man's cufflink. It wasn't the cheap tin of a frontier farmer or a railroad surveyor. It was silver, intricately carved with the image of a coiled snake. It was the kind of thing a wealthy man would wear, a dangerous man, and it was stained with a dark reddish-brown spot that looked terrifyingly like old blood. The week that followed was a quiet, tense dance. On the surface, everything was calm. Sophia was the perfect guest. She helped Mrs. Cooper without being asked, her hands surprisingly skilled at mending and baking. She spoke softly, moved gracefully, and never once complained. But beneath the placid surface, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Xavier watched her. He saw the way her eyes tracked the daily routines of the ranch. He saw how she would stand at the edge of the property, staring out not towards the town, but back the way she came, as if expecting someone. Miguel watched her too, his face a grim, unreadable mask. They were circling each other, the three of them, in a silent standoff. Little things started to happen. A bridle strap on Xavier's saddle, one he'd checked himself, was cut nearly all the way through. He found it just before he mounted. A sack of grain in the barn was slashed open, spilling feed for the rats to get at. Small acts of sabotage, annoyances, not threats, not yet. He wanted to believe it was Josiah, sneaking back for some petty revenge, but it didn't feel like the work of a desperate, cowardly boy. It felt calculated, colder. One night, unable to sleep, Xavier walked out to the corral. The moon was a silver sliver in the sky, casting long, skeletal shadows. He saw a figure standing by the fence, looking out at the horses. It was Sophia. She was humming a soft, sad tune he didn't recognize. He approached without a sound. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, making her jump. She spun around, a hand flying to her chest. "You startled me." "You seem to do a lot of thinking out here at night," he said, leaning against the fence beside her. "There's a lot to think about," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. He decided to stop dancing. He reached into his pocket and held out his hand. The silver cufflink gleamed in the faint moonlight. "I believe this is yours." He watched her face. For a split second, he saw it. Pure, undiluted fear. It was there and then gone, replaced by a carefully constructed mask of confusion. "I've never seen that before. It fell out of your pocket the other night. In my study," he pressed, his voice low and hard. "The one with the coiled snake and the blood stain." She stared at the cufflink in his palm, her breath catching in her throat. The silence stretched, pulled taut between them. The night air was cold, but not as cold as the feeling washing over Xavier. He had brought a viper into his home. Finally, she looked up, and tears whelmed in her storm-gray eyes. This time they looked real. "You're right," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I lied." The confession hung in the air, a poisoned dart. "I'm listening," he said, his voice giving nothing away. "The man," she began, her gaze fixed on some distant point in the darkness. "The man I was supposed to marry, Robert. He wasn't a surveyor. That was a lie." She took a shaky breath. "He was. Something else. He gave me that cufflink. He said it was for luck." "What happened to him?" Xavier asked, keeping the image of the bloodstain at the front of his mind. "He died," she said, the words catching in her throat. "There was a robbery. A stagecoach carrying a mining payroll. It went wrong. There was a shootout with the guards. Robert was killed." Her story had the ring of truth, a tragedy that explained the fear in her eyes. But it didn't explain everything. "And your brother? Where does he fit in?" "Robert's partners," she said, a shiver running through her. "They thought Robert told me where he hid the payroll money before he died. They think I know, but I swear I don't." Her eyes pleaded with him. "Josiah, he's weak. He got into debt with them, one of them, a man named Stillwater. When he couldn't pay, he offered them me instead. He thought they'd get the information out of me and forgive his debt." Vernon Stillwater, the saloon owner from Silver Creek. It all clicked into place. A brutal, simple story of greed and betrayal. It made sense. And yet... "Why didn't you just tell me this from the start?" Xavier asked. "Would you have believed me?" She shot back, a spark of her old fire returning. "A woman tied up with a gang of outlaws? A woman whose fiancé was a thief and a killer? You would have turned me over to the sheriff and washed your hands of it." He couldn't deny it. He might have. "I needed a place to hide," she whispered, the fight going out of her. "A place they wouldn't think to look." "I'm so sorry, Xavier. I never meant to bring this trouble to your door." He looked at her, this woman who was a whirlwind of lies and desperation. He should have been angry. He should have thrown her out. But looking at her trembling in the moonlight, all he felt was a fierce, dangerous surge of protectiveness. He had made a promise to keep her safe. It seemed that promise was about to be tested in ways he could never have imagined. "The sabotage," he said. "The cut bridle, the grain. Is that them? Are they here?" "I think so," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "I think they're watching us, testing your defenses, seeing how hard it will be to get to me." He looked out into the oppressive darkness that surrounded his ranch. It was no longer just empty land. It was enemy territory. He had saved a woman from her brother, only to find himself standing between her and a gang of killers who wanted something she claimed she didn't have. And deep in his gut, a cold voice whispered that the real lie hadn't been told yet. The deadliest secret was still coiled, waiting to strike. The revelation changed everything. The quiet ranch was now a fortress, every shadow a potential threat. Xavier told Miguel the whole story, or at least the story Sophia had told him. The foreman's weathered face tightened, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "So we are not waiting for trouble anymore, Jefe," he said grimly. "We are living in it." Xavier posted Tom on watch at night, armed with a rifle. He and Miguel took turns patrolling the property line, looking for tracks, for any sign of Stillwater's men. The small acts of sabotage stopped. The silence that replaced them was worse. It was the heavy, breathless quiet before a storm. Inside the house, Sophia was a ghost. She moved silently, her eyes wide and haunted. The easy companionship that had started to grow between them was gone, replaced by the stark reality of their situation. He was her protector. She was his charge. A dangerous complication he had willingly brought into his life. One afternoon, he found her in the barn, her hand resting on Thunder's powerful neck. She seemed to draw comfort from the animal's steady presence. "They'll come for me," she said without turning around. "They won't stop." "They'll have to come through me first," Xavier said, his voice a low growl. She finally turned to face him, and the despair in her eyes was a physical blow. "You shouldn't have to. This isn't your fight. You should take me to the sheriff in Silver Falls." "And tell him what? That a gang of outlaws might be after you, with no proof? They'd hold you for a day and then turn you loose, right back into Stillwater's hands." He shook his head. "You're safer here." "Am I?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Or have I just made you and your men a target?" The question hung between them, ugly and unanswerable. He had no right to risk the lives of the people who depended on him. But the thought of turning her away, of leaving her to face Stillwater alone, was impossible. He was trapped. That night, the storm broke. It wasn't Stillwater's men, not directly. It was a fire. It started in the hayloft, a burst of orange against the black sky. Miguel, on watch, fired 2 shots into the air, the signal for attack. Xavier was out of the house in seconds, shotgun in hand. He saw the flames licking at the roof of the barn. "Tom, get the horses out!" he yelled. "Miguel, form a bucket line from the creek." Chaos erupted. Men shouted, horses screamed in terror, and the roar of the fire grew louder, hungrier. It wasn't a large fire. It had been set to cause panic, to draw them all out. A diversion. As he ran toward the barn, a thought struck him with the force of a physical blow. Sophia. He spun around, his heart seizing in his chest. The main house was dark, but in the flickering firelight he saw it. The front door was swinging gently on its hinges, wide open. He had left her alone. He sprinted back to the house, his boots pounding on the hard-packed earth. He burst through the door. "Sophia!" Silence. The house was empty. The stew she'd been making for dinner was still simmering on the stove. A shawl she'd been knitting lay on the armchair, but she was gone. On the dining table, a single object had been placed squarely in the center. It was a silver cufflink, identical to the one he'd found before. But this one wasn't stained with old blood. It was clean, polished, and it held a piece of paper pinned beneath it. With a shaking hand, Xavier picked it up. The note was short, the handwriting a cruel, sharp scrawl. "She came with us willingly. The price was too high for you to pay. Forget her, willingly." The word slammed into him. It couldn't be true. They had taken her. But the open door, the lack of any struggle. It didn't make sense. Unless she had let them in, unless she had been waiting for them all along. Was this the final betrayal? Was her entire story, the tears, the fear, All a lie designed to get her inside his defenses, to use him as a temporary shield until her real allies arrived. The rage that filled him was cold and absolute. He had been played for a fool. Josiah's warning came rushing back. She ain't what she seems. She's a curse. He crumpled the note in his fist. He didn't know what her game was, but it was over. He was no longer her protector. He was the man she had betrayed, and he was coming for her. Not to save her, but to get answers. And then he was going to deliver her to the justice she so clearly deserved. He was riding to Silver Creek. He was going to find Josiah Mayfield and tear the real story out of him, piece by bloody piece. Silver Creek was a festering sore on the face of the territory. It was a town built on greed, run by men who fed on the desperation of others. At the heart of it all was the Gilded Cage, Vernon Stillwater's saloon. It was a 2-story monstrosity of false fronts and gaudy paint, and it was where Xavier knew he would find his answers. He left Miguel in charge of the ranch with strict orders to shoot first and ask questions later if anyone came sniffing around. He rode hard, fueled by a cold, righteous anger. The image of Sophia's empty room, the casual cruelty of the note, burned in his mind. She came with us willingly. He didn't ride into Silver Creek like a lawman. He rode in like a ghost, tethering Thunder in a back alley and entering the Gilded Cage through the kitchen, a $20 bill silencing the protests of a startled cook. The saloon was a cacophony of cheap piano music, drunken laughter, and the clatter of poker chips. The air was thick with the stench of stale whiskey and unwashed bodies. Xavier moved through the crowd, his eyes scanning every face. He didn't see Stillwater, but he did see what he was looking for. Huddled in a dark corner, nursing a bottle of whiskey, was Josiah Mayfield. He looked worse than when Xavier had last seen him. He was gaunt, his eyes darting nervously, his hands shaking so badly he could barely lift his glass. Xavier slid into the chair opposite him. Josiah looked up, and the color drained from his face. He looked like he'd seen a dead man walk in. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Me?" Xavier said, his voice dangerously soft. "We need to talk. About your sister." Josiah flinched. "I don't know nothing. She's dead to me, I told you." Xavier leaned forward, his presence so menacing it seemed to suck the air from around them. "She's gone. Taken from my ranch last night. They left a note saying she went willingly. Now, you and I both know your sister might be a liar, but she wasn't a fool. She wouldn't go with them. Not unless she had no other choice. So you're going to tell me the real story, not the one she told me, the real one, or I'm going to take you apart right here in this saloon." The boy started to tremble, tears of pure terror welling in his eyes. "You don't understand," he stammered. "Stillwater. He's not the one in charge. He's just a lapdog." Xavier's blood went cold. "In charge of what?" "Robert?" Josiah choked out the name. "Her fiancé, the one she said died." "He's dead," Xavier stated, his eyes boring into Josiah. Josiah let out a strangled, hysterical laugh. "Dead? Mister, you don't get it. He's not dead. He never was." The saloon seemed to fade away. The music, the laughter, it all became a distant hum. "What are you talking about?" Xavier demanded, his voice a low growl. "The robbery," Josiah said, the words spilling out of him in a desperate torrent. "The shootout? It was all a lie. Robert planned the whole thing. He shot one of his own men to make it look good, to make everyone think the gang was broken, that he was dead. He faked his death to escape the law. He's been hiding out, waiting for things to cool down." Xavier felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Sophia's story, her grief, the tears, all of it. A performance. "But the money from the payroll went missing," Josiah continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Robert thinks Sophia took it. Or at least that she knows where it is. He thinks she double-crossed him and ran. That's why he sent Stillwater after her. Not to sell her. To get her back. To get his money back. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Sophia hadn't been running from Stillwater. She'd been running from Robert. She hadn't stumbled into Xavier's path by accident. She had chosen him. She had seen a strong man, an isolated ranch, a perfect place to hide from a monster of her own making. "Where is he?" Xavier demanded. "Where is Robert?" "He has a cabin," Josiah whimpered, "up in the Ghostwood Mountains, a day's ride from here. That's where they would have taken her." Xavier stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floorboards. He looked down at the pathetic, weeping boy. "You sold your own sister to a man like that." "I didn't have a choice," Josiah cried. "He would have killed me." Xavier didn't care. He turned and walked away, leaving Josiah to drown in his whiskey and his cowardice. He strode through the saloon, his purpose clear, his fury a white-hot flame. He finally understood. Sophia hadn't gone willingly. The cufflink, the note. It was a message from Robert, a taunt. "I have what's mine. I have her." The fight wasn't about money anymore. It was about a woman, a liar and a manipulator who had run to him for protection, and damn him to hell, he was going to give it to her. He was no longer the fool who had been betrayed. He was the man who had made a promise, and he was riding into the mountains to finish this, one way or another. The justice he intended to deliver would be swift, and it would be final. The ride into the Ghostwood Mountains was a descent into hell. The trail was a narrow, winding scar on the face of the rock, the pines clawing at him like skeletal fingers. The air grew thin and cold. This was a place where men went to disappear, and Xavier knew that Robert would not expect anyone to follow. He rode with a singular focus, the anger in his belly now honed to a razor's edge. Every lie Sophia had told him was a betrayal, yet every image of her terrified face was a call to arms. He was caught in a storm of his own making, and the only way out was through. He found the cabin just as the sun began to dip below the jagged peaks, staining the sky the color of a fresh bruise. It was a small, crude structure, tucked away in a box canyon easily defended. A thin tendril of smoke curled from the stone chimney. 2 horses were tethered outside. He dismounted, tying Thunder in a thicket of aspen a quarter-mile down the trail. He approached on foot, his rifle in his hands, moving with the practiced silence of a scout. He crept to a grimy window at the side of the cabin. The scene inside froze the blood in his veins. Sophia was there, tied to a chair. Her face was pale, the bruise on her cheek a ghastly purple. Standing over her was a man. He was tall and handsome in a cruel, predatory way, with dark hair and eyes that glittered in the lamplight. It had to be Robert. "I'm going to ask you one more time, my love," Robert said, his voice a silken threat. "Where is my money?" "I don't know," Sophia said, her voice raw. "I swear to you, Robert, I never took it." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You always were a terrible liar." He backhanded her across the face, a sharp, cracking sound that made Xavier's vision go red. "I know you, Sophia. You were always smarter than you let on. You found my map. You took it before you ran." "There was no map," she sobbed. "Don't play games with me," he snarled, grabbing a fistful of her hair and yanking her head back. "My partners are getting impatient. Stillwater is a fool, but he has his uses. If you don't tell me, I'm going to let him have you, and his methods are far less civilized than mine." That was all Xavier needed to hear. He kicked the door off its hinges. The explosion of splintering wood and righteous fury caught Robert completely by surprise. He spun around, his hand flying to the gun on his hip, but Xavier was already on him. He brought the butt of his rifle up in a vicious arc, catching Robert square on the jaw. The man staggered back, spitting a tooth, his handsome face contorting in a mask of rage. "Blackwood," he snarled, recognizing him. "The righteous rancher. She ran to you, did she? Found herself another fool to protect her." "Let her go," Xavier said, his voice a low growl as he leveled the rifle at Robert's chest. You think you can just walk in here? Robert laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. This is my world, my rules. Suddenly, a voice came from the shadows in the corner of the room. He's right, you know. Vernon Stillwater stepped into the light, a sawed-off shotgun held casually in his hands. He was a big man, running to fat, with small piggy eyes that were devoid of any warmth. You should have stayed on your ranch, Cowboy. This doesn't concern you. Xavier was caught. A rifle on Robert, a shotgun on him. Sophia was still tied to the chair, watching with wide, terrified eyes. It was a standoff. She told me everything, Xavier bluffed, his mind racing. About the money, about the map. Robert's eyes narrowed. Did she now? She said it's hidden on my ranch, Xavier lied, hoping to throw them off to buy himself a second. She led you here on a wild goose chase while your money is sitting under my nose. The lie was a desperate gamble, but he saw a flicker of doubt in Robert's eyes. Stillwater, however, just chuckled. Nice try. But we've been watching your ranch. If there was money there, we'd have it by now. He gestured with the shotgun. Now drop the rifle, slowly. Xavier knew he had no choice. He lowered the rifle to the floor. The moment it clattered against the wood, Robert lunged, not for the rifle, but for Sophia. He pressed the barrel of his pistol to her temple. Wrong move, rancher, Robert hissed, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. Now, we're all going to have a little chat, and my dear Sophia is going to tell us everything we want to know, or her new friend gets to watch her die. But as he said it, Sophia did something none of them expected. With a surge of desperate strength, she kicked the leg of her chair backward, throwing herself and the chair off balance. She crashed to the floor, pulling Robert's aim away for a split second. It was the only opening Xavier needed. He dove for his rifle as Robert fired, the shot going wild, splintering the wall above his head. Stillwater swung the shotgun around, but he was too slow. Xavier rolled, brought his rifle up, and fired from the floor. The shot caught Stillwater in the chest, throwing him back against the wall. The shotgun clattered from his lifeless hands. Robert stared in shock for a fraction of a second, then turned his gun back toward Sophia on the floor. But Xavier was already moving. He launched himself across the small room, a human battering ram, and slammed into Robert, sending them both crashing through the flimsy wall of the cabin and out into the freezing night air. They landed in a heap in the dirt, a tangle of limbs and fury. Xavier's rifle was lost in the fall. Robert came up swinging, his fists like stones. He was strong, wiry, and fought with the viciousness of a cornered animal. They traded blows, grunting with effort, their breath pluming in the icy air. Inside the cabin, Sophia was struggling desperately with her ropes. The crash had splintered the chair she was tied to, and she managed to work one hand free. She scrambled for Stillwater's fallen shotgun. It was heavy, unfamiliar, but her resolve was iron. Outside, Xavier was losing. Robert had him pinned, his hands around his throat, squeezing the life out of him. Xavier's vision began to tunnel, black spots dancing in his eyes. Suddenly, the doorway of the cabin was filled with a silhouette. Sophia stood there, the huge shotgun in her hands, its twin barrels aimed squarely at Robert's back. "Get off him!" she screamed, her voice a raw, primal cry. Robert froze, his grip loosening just enough for Xavier to suck in a desperate gasp of air. He turned his head slowly, a look of utter disbelief on his face. "Sophia," he chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "You wouldn't. You loved me." "You were a disease," she said, her voice shaking but her hands steady on the weapon. "And I'm the cure." She pulled both triggers. The roar of the shotgun was deafening in the small canyon. The blast threw Robert off of Xavier, his body a broken mess. Silence descended, thick and heavy, broken only by the sound of Sophia's ragged sobs as she dropped the heavy gun and sank to her knees. Xavier pushed himself up, his throat raw, his body bruised but alive. He crawled over to her, pulling her into his arms. She collapsed against him, shaking uncontrollably. "It's over," he whispered, stroking her hair. "It's over." They stayed like that for a long time, huddled together in the dirt outside the ruined cabin, while the cold mountain stars watched them in silent judgment. He had gone into the mountains to find a liar. He had found something else instead. He had found a woman who had been pushed to the absolute edge, a woman who had found the strength to kill the monster who had haunted her. As the first light of dawn touched the peaks, Xavier finally helped her to her feet. They didn't speak. There were no words for what had happened. He found a shovel in the cabin and buried the two men in shallow, unmarked graves. It was a rough justice, the only kind the territory seemed to understand. He found the map. It was tucked into the lining of Robert's saddlebag. It was a simple drawing of their old farm, with an X marking a spot by an old stone well. The money was real. He looked at Sophia. Her face was a blank mask of shock and exhaustion. "The payroll," he said quietly, holding out the map. "It's yours. You can take it, go anywhere you want. Start over." She looked at the map, then up at him. Her storm-gray eyes were clear for the first time since he'd met her. The lies were gone. The fear was gone. All that was left was a raw, aching truth. "I don't want the money," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's tainted, cursed. All I want—" She trailed off, her gaze falling to the ground. "What do you want, Sophia?" he asked gently. She looked up at him, and what he saw in her eyes stole his breath. It was a fragile, hesitant flicker of hope. "I want to go home," she said. "To the ranch, if you'll still have me." He looked at this complicated, broken, and beautiful woman. He thought of his quiet, orderly life and how she had shattered it to pieces. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he never wanted it back. "Let's go home," he said. The journey back to the ranch was a quiet one. The violence in the mountains had stripped them of everything but the essential truth of their situation. They were two survivors, bound together by blood and fire. When they finally rode into the ranch yard, Miguel met them, his rifle held at the ready. He took one look at their faces, at the grim set of Xavier's jaw and the hollowed-out look in Sophia's eyes, and simply nodded. No questions were asked. The days that followed were a time of healing. Sophia rarely spoke of what had happened, but the nightmares came for her in the dark. Xavier would wake to her muffled cries, and he would hold her until the shaking stopped, offering a silent comfort that went beyond words. The physical bruises faded, but the deeper wounds remained. Mrs. Cooper, with her endless well of quiet wisdom, seemed to understand. She fussed over Sophia, brewing calming teas and ensuring she ate, mothering her back from the brink with simple, steady kindness. One evening, about a week after their return, Xavier found Sophia sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. She had a small, leather-bound book in her lap. It was a journal. "This was my mother's," she said softly as he sat down beside her. "She told me to write down the important things, the moments that change you." She looked up at him. "I haven't written in it in a very long time." He waited, letting her find her own words. "When I met Robert," she began, her voice distant, "I was young. I thought he was a grand adventure. He promised me the world. By the time I realized the world he lived in was built on violence and lies, I was trapped. I was so ashamed." Her hand went to her abdomen, a gesture he'd seen before but hadn't understood. Now a dawning, terrifying suspicion began to form in his mind. "I tried to leave him," she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, "but he wouldn't let me go. He said I belonged to him." The tears that welled in her eyes were not for the monster she had killed, but for the girl she had been. "So I ran. I didn't know where to go. I just knew I had to protect. Her voice broke. Sophia, Xavier said, his voice tight. What aren't you telling me? She looked at him, her face a portrait of fear and desperate hope. When you found me on that trail, I was running from more than just Robert. I was running for more than just my own life. She took a deep, shuddering breath. I'm with child, Xavier. It's Robert's. The world tilted on its axis. A child, a baby, the final living piece of the nightmare she had just escaped. It explained everything. Her desperation, the ferocity of her will to survive, the ultimate reason she had pulled those triggers. She hadn't been saving him. She'd been saving her child. He should have felt betrayed all over again. Another lie, another secret. But all he felt was an overwhelming wave of compassion. He looked at her, at the fierce, protective love that had driven her to do the unthinkable, and he saw not a liar, but a mother. He can never know, she whispered, her hands twisting in her lap. If his partners ever found out, they would see the baby as a claim on that money, a loose end. They would hunt us down. They won't, Xavier said, his voice firm, a solid rock in her sea of fear. No one will ever touch you or your child, I swear it. She looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Why? After all I've done, all the lies I've told you, why would you do this for me? He thought about his empty house, his lonely life, the ghost of a wife he had lost years ago. He thought about this impossible, courageous woman who had turned his world upside down. I told you once, he said quietly, that I'm not most men. He stood up and held out his hand. There will be talk, he said, gossip, questions. There's only one way to silence it for good. She looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face, her expression one of dawning disbelief. Marry me, Sophia, he said, the words simple and true. Marry me. Let me give your child a name, a father, let me give him my name. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time they were not tears of fear or sorrow. They were tears of impossible, unhoped-for relief. She placed her small, trembling hand in his. Yes, she whispered. Yes. They were married a month later by a traveling preacher, a simple ceremony in the ranch yard with only Mrs. Cooper and Miguel as witnesses. Sophia wore a borrowed dress, and her hair was held in place by a silver comb Xavier had bought for her in town. She was pale, but her eyes were steady as she took his name, leaving the ghosts of Mayfield and Robert behind forever. The months that followed were a quiet peace. The secret they shared was a bond that forged their marriage into something stronger than any vows. As her body changed, so did the ranch. A room was prepared, a cradle was built. Xavier found himself watching her with a sense of wonder, his protective instinct warring with a tenderness that was entirely new to him. This was not the child of his blood, but it was the child of his heart, of his choice. When the time came, the birth was hard and fast, a storm that mirrored the violence that had created this new life. But when it was over, there was a new sound in the house, the cry of a baby girl. They named her Elizabeth. She had Sophia's storm-gray eyes and a shock of dark hair. One evening, Xavier stood at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the land, his home. He felt a small hand slip into his. Sophia came to stand beside him, their daughter sleeping soundly in a cradle by the fire. I never thought I could be this happy, she said softly. I never thought I deserved to be. He turned to her and drew her close. We made this, Sophia, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You and me, we took the worst parts of our lives and we built this. He had saved a woman on a dusty road, a woman who was a liar, a thief's lover, a killer. And in doing so, he had found his own salvation. He had found a family. He had found a love forged not in whispered promises and moonlight, but in gunpowder and blood and a fierce, unyielding will to survive. He had found a home. What started with a gunshot had ended with a sleeping child. Justice on the frontier was a messy, unpredictable thing. But sometimes, if you were lucky, it looked a lot like peace. If you enjoyed this story and believe that even the most tangled pasts can lead to a beautiful future, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button for more tales from the edge of the wild.